Welcome to the special broadcast of Workers Connect Radio. In this bulletin, we are going to discuss the skyrocketing rise in workplace accidents and what can workers and unions do about it. The caving in of an under construction tunnel in Silkyara region of Uttarkashi brought the issue to center stage. 41 trapped workers were lucky enough to be rescued after 17 days on 28th of November 2023. However, the situation remains grim for other workers. Since 28th of November, Workers Connect Radio noted over 60 deaths in workplace accidents. This means on an average 2 workers lost their life daily while on duty. To understand what leads to workplace accidents and what can workers do about it, we have with us Heiner Kohnen. Heiner is an expert on workplace health and safety and the coordinator of Trans Information Exchange Network, a platform that brings together workers from across the supply chain. Heiner, welcome to Workers Connect Radio. As we have discussed, the situation is very, very grim. So my first question to you is, what leads to lack of and lapse in safety at workplaces?
Yes, in the end, I guess it's very simple. In the end, it's about profit. When we talk about health and safety, we know today globally we call it collective safety measures, which generally would prevent most 99% of all possible accidents even. Like you have a machinery, for example, or a stamping machine. Yeah, collective safety would mean you put your hand inside the stamping machine and the stamping would be blocked. There is no way. The other idea to make this, to tell a worker, you should not put your hand in the stamping. So, the lack in the end, it's about profit. So we have measures technically which would exclude accidents, which would make them impossible, even if a worker would say, I would do against my own, I would act against my own safety. So in the end, it's the question, are companies, do they accept to pay in this collective safety measure or they don't? And so in the end, it's a question. A second could be, let's say, is about blaming workers. It's of course much cheaper not to invest in a kind of technical collective safety, but to tell workers, don't do that. So we globally in our network, we see this. And of course, then companies would even blame workers and tell them when there was an accident happened. And it's true. Workers in that case often would maybe a wrong or a mistaken effort. But you have to ask, why is this? And again, we understand and we know from many stories we have on workplaces, on very different workplaces, from the rural sector, industrial sector, construction sector, other sectors, why workers may do against or they an act against might be because of stress, workload, fear, so that you think you would not be able to work to get the work to perform the workload. So in the end, for us, it is very clear that it is about profit, it's about money, not to invest. And there is even a kind of management figure. You can say how much do you have to invest and how much is a human cost, whatever that may be.
This brings me to the second part of the question. As you pointed out, that workers are at times forced by their managers and supervisors to bypass safety measures, and there is a fear of losing jobs. Wanting to maximize profits, companies often want to put the blame on workers. But at the same time, we see an emphasis on personal protective equipments or PPEs. What is your take on these personal protective equipments?
Yeah, that's a good point, because we can see that actually worldwide. It doesn't matter if this is Germany or Brazil or the US or African continent or on the workplace of the Asian continent. We have even in Europe and where I work mostly, we have even a whole kind of, we call it health industry at the workplaces, where it is told you should eat vitamins, you should eat apples, you have a health week, you should have an apple week at the workplace where you learn to eat apples, so to keep you healthy. It's all about actually not about the workplace, not about the risk as the workplace, but keep yourself So keep yourself adapted to adapt to the bad working conditions. So again, it's more like, and we know this blame. For us, it's a key issue actually that most workers who get sick, not only who have accident, but who got sick, we have researchers where more than 70% of those workers say, oh, it's me. I'm not fully keeping the thing. So, and even we know from the ILO that depression is one of the major, not only diseases of our century, but workplace disease. And politically spoken, depression means you put the aggression not against the outside, but against yourself. And so telling a worker it's about you. You should make yoga, you should make anti-stress to adapt to the workplace. This is very clear again to that point of actually not addressing the workplace, not addressing the risk and hazards at the workplace, but put the whole burden, put the whole responsibility to the worker. And the consequence that we see is people can do as much yoga and as much apple eating and as much healthy living. In the end, it's like athletes. It's sooner or later sometimes. In the end, you always get sick because that's why the issue of stress-related issues are so much increasing because workplaces don't allow anymore to breathe, to relax, and to have also the post time. So it's a very conscious, to our opinion, a very conscious policy actually to emphasize on the worker because again, it's much easier, it's much cheaper to actually blame on the worker instead of, and it has another political function. It's against solidarity. When you have a group, a team, and one gets sick, so who is to blame? When you have a system where the low performance or the sick performance of a worker would actually has impact to the other workers, you start to blame your co-worker instead of the system, instead of the bad conditions. So you start blaming the other one. Why is he or she not able to perform?
So, what are some of the best practices you would recommend, or are there any models that can be replicated to make workplaces safer for everyone?
Generally, I would say the first practice is a kind of a tool where you have to ask the workers themselves, where are the hazards and what is your opinion and your ideas of changing? Wherever in the world we could do that, like we have some tools also to do that, like the health mapping, which is a tool to involve workers, workshop methods to involve workers. We really found actually that workers themselves have many ideas actually to make the workplace more safe. And in some cases where it wasn't implemented afterwards, those hazards that we just had a case like this as well at Daimler in Germany, but also in Brazil, in the industry, where people died afterwards and before workers had exactly told this is a hazardous. So that is a political first. That's about, it's not an example, but it's a kind of a method to how to do that. The second is, as I mentioned before, instead of a personal safety, we call it collective safety. These are all measures which would prevent accidents even when you would fail. Every human being fails because when you work 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours constantly under pressure or constantly under high speed, you have moments where you fail. So from occupational health issues, we look for collective measures, like I explained before, like a stamping machine. You can put your hand and it would digitally block the stamping so that you can't, that even though you do a mistaken action, you would not be able to be harmed. And you have these examples in any in any, like you have even a chainsaw in the building construction. The old chainsaw, I was a carpenter in the beginning. They had no protection at all. Today you make a wrong move and the chainsaw would block. So the modern actually equipment is all like this, that you can be mistaken, but it's the technology that prevents you to have that prevents you to have any impact on your health.
You have pointed to several interesting things, but the most prominent one catching my attention is the issue of digitalization. How do you see digitalization shaping health and safety measures at workplaces?
Oh, there is a huge impact. But first, I have to say, we as a network are not against technology. We are not against digitalization. But at the same time, we must understand that progress, technological progress, doesn't fall from heaven. It's not a natural thing, but it's always a social process. It's a social process. So which technology, what algorithm? It's humankind who is actually putting it. The developers putting it, and always social interests are put into the certain technology. So the problem often with what we see as digitalization is a technology where workers, unions, social movements, citizens were not part of the development process, and so social interests, workers' interests are generally not into the put into this in the certain technology. So where we have worked on this also in many regions in the world, and too bad to say, there is definitely an increase in control. And this is behavior control, but it's more also control about the work process, taking the air, we would say in German, taking the air of the work process. So it would result always in more stress by controlling not only the worker, but controlling the workflow. We could also say to this issue of control, you have in history, you had two management forms of control. You have, we call it Tayloristic control, where it's an external control. There's someone behind checking, like the line worker in the car industry, and always making your movements more effective. You have an internal control, like we call in quality management programs, lean production program, where we try, in German, we call it take the gold of the mind of the workers, would say, hey, you're part of the family, you're part of the team, you're bringing your productive ideas, so yourself make it more effective. Digital control brings two aspects together, both aspects together. That means an Amazon worker, he has a scanner on his arm, and this scanner would look or control every movement he or she is doing. While doing this, you give away information. You give information where you walk, how you walk, and a company like Amazon is able to compare this in real time in all the workers in similar architectures of their fulfillment centers, and so is constantly making more effective the movements. And it is not an external control, because you as worker would give away data by carrying this without knowing, without wanting, and you have no way to prevent this. So you give away your information to knowing to do things, and it comes back as strange, as weird as the company's knowledge. The second thing we know, of course, this results in more stress, because it results again in more speed up. It would result what we see in Europe. I don't know how this is in India, about discussions of work time. So flexible work times, flexibilization of work tasks, that we even in retail, you have somehow industrialized approaches where you would cut the day into 50 minutes tacts. Suddenly at H&M and Zara, these are retail stores of clothing, you talk about tact time, which is normally a language of the car industry and the line workers. So you tact now also all kinds of let's say, industrial work, but also work of white collar people. It might be in the office, might be in the development areas, or in retail. And this creates conflicts about flexible work time, but also flexible contracts. The question is, when more and more knowledge is somehow centered in the technology, workers become also more replaceable. And this means where we have many examples like this. And I give you an example of Zara, of a retail store, where um, now the algorithm is able to give very clear and focused and specific work orders. The algorithm can do this in any language. And so what happened is certain specific workers were completely replaced by temp workers or agency workers. So we can see a kind of all kinds of shift of power. So our question in the end is always, when our experience is when we don't interfere in the process of technology as workers, we lose. So it's about actually building strategies how to interfere. In Germany, we have at H&M, which is another clothing retail store, the union won a collective agreement where workers, the union, works council, that is the representation of workers at the stores, the shop floor, they would be involved equally in the designing of technology. So should this technology be able to do before it comes? And then technology can be something different. It can be an assistance to worker. And then technology is great. If it takes away, let's say, boring tasks, we are happy. And if it assists in other, so it's a great tool. But it depends in the end which interests are hidden in the algorithm.
Well, you talked about health mapping. Could you shed some more light on what is health mapping and how can unions and workers use it to have a say at their workplaces in the matters of health and safety? And can unions use it for collectivizing workers?
Yeah, that's a good point too, because we found in our international network in the last 20, 25 years that health and safety actually is a key mobilizing issue for workers. Why? Stress, I get sick, I can't cope, are actually key issues when we succeed, that workers talk about it, that it becomes not a guilt issue, oh, I'm not able, but it becomes a collective issue. So we were looking already 20 years ago for instruments that are able actually to bring a kind of a public or an atmosphere, or create an atmosphere between workers and a culture between workers where they can speak about their fears, their wishes, and build demands, build a union really from the bottom up, from the shop floor. So health mapping is one of these tools that we found, and we developed this in an international collective way. We found first experiences in Canada and the US, then we saw them in Mexico. We discussed them further in Brazil. We brought it there to Germany, and from there in other countries. So it was a collective development process. It's in the end, it's a very simple tool. It's a workshop method where you bring workers together, group of workers together, and it has various steps. In the first step, you ask them and you draw a picture of a body, back and front, and you ask them, can you put dots where you have any kind of a health issue that you relate to work? What happens is that workers would put dots, and they would put a lot of dots. You suddenly see it's not a personal individual, but a collective body. And you ask workers, what do the dots mean? And suddenly you hear worker stories about anxiousness, about fear, I can't sleep, about pain. And any atmosphere who was maybe in the beginning a bit, where am I? What is this kind of a workshop? People listen because you recognize yourself. You build actually collective consciousness. You build something like a glass experience. In the second step, you ask, how does this impact your life beyond the workplace? So you would talk about your children, what impacts work, about your life, about your family life, maybe even violence, or what does it mean for women having an extra, having at home to clean, wash, cook. And in the third moment, you ask, what is the reason? What are actually the causes, the hazards that result in this health issue as the workplace? You draw a painting of the workplace, and workers would tell in many, that is our experience in many very detailed way, all the hazards. In the fourth and fifth, we prioritize this of workers, and we ask them of every hazard and every workplace problem, how is their idea, how are their demands for change, and you build the union around it so that you take the union take this to the bargaining table, and workers know now it's the union would bargain their issues, and so we always felt this as an amazing tool. We see this again with engineers at Daimler or with rural workers in South Africa or Brazil. So along the whole chain of workers' identities, we see this as an amazing tool to bargaining and build workplace power and build actually a workers' consciousness, collectiveness, and identity between, or like a collectivity between the union organization and the workers. We use this, by the way, even along supply chains. So we did this exercise also between workers, like from retail in Germany, like from Bangladeshi or Indian garment workers, and they would put dots in similar ways to their body, and they would explain each other. So then you hear also it's women workers in retail in Germany, women workers in Bangladesh or India who save hazards, who save harassment, who face bad salaries, and you create, let's say, a class consciousness and a collective consciousness, or even along supply chain.
Thank you very much, Heiner. It has been a very enriching interaction. You were listening to our discussion with German health and safety expert Heiner Kohnen. If you would like to learn more about health mapping and how you can use it at your workplace, please do leave a comment below, and we would request Heiner to answer your questions. We eagerly look forward to your comments and suggestions on this special broadcast of Workers Connect Radio. You can leave your comments below or get in touch with us over phone number 9811105738. That's all for today. We'll be back next week with the latest updates from the world of work.